Hello, today we're here with Pamela Turchin, and Pamela is our production editor at Etruscan Press, and we're delighted to have her here. Normally, of course, you'd see her in the majestic Etruscan office, but because of our circumstances with COVID, Pamela, like most of us, is working virtually working out of her home. Welcome, Pamela.
Good morning. Good afternoon.
We don't even know anymore. Day, night, whatever. Hey, first of all, tell us a little bit about how you got involved in being a production editor at Etruscan Press.
Sure. I became a student in the Maslow Family Creative Writing Program at Wilkes University in January 2016. And I believe it was July, I came into the program as a graduate assistant while I was a student. And so that's how I became working at Etruscan Press. I was working as a GA for the press and also for the university. And then I believe I was the production associate, and I've been the production editor for about 3 years now.
Wow. And so during that time, you've literally gone from being a student to being a GA and a student at the same time, to being an alumnus, a graduate, and a production editor.
Yes.
So that's quite a lot of movement in a very short time. It's great, and of course, because it's such a small organization, I mean, we really just have you and Bill working in the office, and now Bill is, of course, going to be working outside of the office. You guys have a real synergy, and you do a lot of different kinds of things, not just one thing. I mean, you might come into a day and find several things on your desk from various projects and books. But why don't you, in order to kind of make this a little simpler, why don't we just talk about perhaps one book, even though recognizing that on your calendar, this book might be only one of the projects going on. But if you might take us through one book from manuscript coming across the transom all the way through the final product that gets out into the public and into the hands of readers.
Okay. So the book that I chose is a poetry collection called Scar by Bruce Bond. And Bruce Bond is not a first-time author with Etruscan Press. We've published several of his books. And speaking of the process of how a book goes from the manuscript to final production, I will be sending Bruce's press release this Friday. So that's how close we are to final production. And that's exciting.
Yes.
And it's because one of the things that I learned early on in this position is that a book isn't published in a few weeks or a month. It could take about 18 months to go from the final manuscript to final publication. And now here we are with Bruce's book. After all of this arduous process, I'm ready to send the press release this Friday. And the press release is sent to contacts to let them know that his book is about to be published. So the release will go out on Friday, and then I believe his pub date is November 10th. So that's how close we are.
Wow. And you followed this obviously through the entire process. As a side note, you're dealing with the authors directly also. I mean,
Yes.
You are the person who talks to them. What's that like, Pamela, to talking to authors? How do tell us what authors are like from your point of view? Hold nothing back.
Well, talking with authors directly and interacting with them on a daily basis kind of makes me feel like a mini celebrity. I mean, these are real authors that I had absolutely no contact with before I before I started working with the press. Authors were always kind of in the ether somewhere, like these, untouchable people that you couldn't talk to, you couldn't communicate with. And now, I email them all day long and talk to them on the phone, and they're just like anybody else. They just are very excited about their books, and they always have great things to say about the press. They care, and the one-on-one shepherding that they get, and many of them say that they've never experienced that before. If they had, prior experience with other publishing companies, they just really kind of tell us all the time about how they're just so surprised that they get this one-on-one, I don't want to say hand-holding, but I mean, we really take them from the beginning process all the way to the end. and at every step of the way. And it's something that I really come to enjoy.
And I think that's something that's part of this whole course that we're talking about, 616 and Wilkes, and also at Youngstown State. Part of what I know is amazing to me is that there's so little formal education or opportunities for education about publishing, and so even well-published authors sometimes have only a very sketchy idea of the publishing process itself, or they may have a very hit and miss kind of relationship. I always tell the students, anybody can get published these days. I mean, there's 80,000 presses out there. Anybody can get published. Like anybody can get married. The key is you got to marry the right person, and you got to be published with the right place. And I think a lot of times authors aren't familiar with what you do behind the scenes. And I think that's one of the reasons for our success, is that you bring them in to the process, and they feel for the first time, perhaps, that they're included, that their input is valued, and that they have a say. And it's not just some mysterious process and operation that takes place outside of their control.
Right. I've had actually a few authors say to me and to Bill, to all of us, wow, I had no idea how much went into publishing my book. I didn't know it was going to take so long, and I didn't really understand all the different steps. I mean, that's true. Like, there are authors coming in, especially newer authors who have never been published before. They literally have no idea how much goes on to get their book published behind the scenes. It's extraordinary.
Right. And that's also one of the things, when I'm talking to prospective authors or people, who've sent us their manuscript whom we like, I'll say, look, you're probably going to have some choices, and you're going to have different kinds of publishing companies that may be interested in your work. And some of those other companies, if they're commercial companies, may offer you an advance that's much larger than anything we can offer. And yet, you have to think of what you want out of getting published. Not just, is it money, or is it this kind of community that I think many small presses like ours help create and sustain? And I think that's one of the things that people like in the publishing course who may have a manuscript, they got to give that some consideration to what's the relationship that you want to have, and who's going to best help create that relationship. So that's one, it's fascinating to me to think about, myself going from knowing really, when I started Etruscan with Mooney, I tell people, I knew about publishing the way foodies know about restaurants. I knew what I liked,
Right.
but didn't really know anything about how to get there. And over the years, with your help, with Bill's help, with the people who came before, we've just developed this kind of community and operation that welcomes in new people all the time, people of very different temperaments and experience.
Yes.
But you've brought up Bruce Bond, who is, of course, one of the authors that we first published. When we first started Etruscan, I solicited work from Bruce Bond, whom I'd known, collegially, and he sent us, his book Cinder was the first book that we published of his, and this latest book, Scar, is coming out almost 20 years after Cinder came out.
Right.
So, and in that time, we've done, we did Peel, we did The Other Sky, we did Choir of the Wells. So we've been keeping in touch with Bruce while he's also publishing elsewhere.
Yes.
Because he's very prolific.
Very prolific.
So, anyway, Pamela, take us through the process.
So I thought that I would pull up the full cover of Scar just to show what the front cover and back cover looks like of the book that we're about to be publishing. So I'm going to see if I could do screen share here. Okay, screen share. Do you see it?
No, we still just see you.
Hmm. I apologize for
No,
the.
I know the feeling. This happens to me every time.
I am the co-host, right?
Yep, you're a
Well,
co-host.
forget about the cover. I'm just gonna pull up the marketing plan on my screen. I apologize about that, and I can
No
just.
problem.
And if I can't pull it up, I can be talking about it at the same time, if that's okay.
Yeah, and the students can look at the cover because it's in the consortium catalog, which is also
Right.
available to them.
Oh, I don't know why this isn't. Oh, hold on. I might be able to
You got it. There it goes.
see it.
We see there it is. Beautiful.
Okay. Sorry about that.
No
So
problem.
before, I was going to say, before I have a marketing plan, we send something out to the author called the Author Questionnaire. And it's a pretty lengthy document, everything from basic information to um, places and publications that the author would like us to send the ARCs, which stands for Advanced Reader Copies. Those are the copies that go out to reviewers. Everything from a synopsis to a book description to comparable titles of books that they think kind of match their manuscript. So I take the author questionnaire and I use, the information that they've provided, and then I put it into something called a marketing plan. So this is what a marketing plan looks like. And they all start with this basic information here with the author's name and title. And you see a word here called blurbs. For people that don't know what that means, those are the kind of, it's like a promotional little snapshot that's provided by someone to kind of say good things about the book. And that's why I was kind of trying to pull up this cover here. I don't know if I can. Do you see it now? Do you see the full?
No, not yet.
Yeah, I don't. Sorry about that. Blur, like when you look at the back cover of a book, someone has taken their time to actually say something, good about the author's book, and so that's why it says blurbs needed here. That's the date that we needed them. This is the tentative ARC distribution date, the day that the ARCs will be distributed. And then here's the release date, like I just spoke about, October 16th, which is this Friday. That's the day that I'll be sending the press release. If I'm going too fast, just, kind of slow me down. It starts with the author bio. And the reason that there are two versions of the author bio is sometimes we use the larger version for different promotional purposes. Sometimes we just need the shorter bio. So that's why there's two there. This is the main book description. The 20-word sales handle is really important because that's the first thing that booksellers are going to see on a lot of our promotional materials. We have a distributor called Consortium, and that's where this information gets plugged into their website, and they refer to it as metadata. So the sales handle is something that, we really want it to like kind of grab readers' attention. This is the target audience, what we and the author believe, where the book should be targeted towards. The keywords are words that Consortium, our distributor, asks for as part of the metadata, and these are the keywords for SCAR: poetry, sonnet, trauma, Dante, music, linguistics, psychology. And those words will actually help booksellers and libraries find this book easier by using these keywords.
And
These
and not only that, Pamela, the key thing about what you guys do with the keywords, which is cool, is it breaks out of the poetry reading uh, readership. In other words, maybe somebody who might be interested in drama or music or psychology who doesn't necessarily have a big library of poetry. And I think that's one of the key things that we try to emphasize is how else to reach people who don't necessarily read poetry all the time, but who might be interested in this particular book.
Right, like look at the word linguistics.
Right.
How else would they find a poetry book using the word linguistics? So that's
Right.
pretty cool. These are the potential contacts for reviewers or ARCs. These are the people that Bruce expressed interest in having his advanced reader copies sent to. Hopefully that, someone at these publications would review SCAR. The next section is local or hometown newspapers, radio stations. And the reason it says see separate future document is because I take whatever he provided on his author questionnaire and then I create something called an email blast, which is just basically the email addresses that he provided. And that's where I'll be sending that press release on Friday that I mentioned. We do a lot with academic adoption and departments, so that's why it says English, creative writing, and poetry. And this is a very interesting thing about our books that I had never known before I started working here, is that each book gets an academic study guide that's available to people that are teaching college level courses. And we put a lot of care into it. Sometimes you know, it's written by a graduate assistant and then it's sent to the editorial team and we take a look over it, you know, proofread it, make sure that everything is correct. And then it goes to the author. Sometimes the author will say, you know, maybe this question should be worded a little bit differently, or I really like the way that, you know, this was presented. So most of the time, I mean, authors are thrilled. They had no idea that along, you know, everything else that we were going to do to market their book, that we were also going to provide a study guide for them. And they're really thrilled with that aspect.
And that's been, you know, I've used that in courses, and it really, it makes the book so much more accessible to the students. You know, those study guides, and I'll share some of them with the students. They're marvelous. They really make you think about the book in a different way. And I think for the authors, they make them realize, wow, this book has been truly and thoroughly read, you know, by someone. And the students, I think, who are sometimes, you know, especially if you're talking about undergraduate students or high school students, and in some cases we've done separate study guides for high school and for
Yes.
university students. And a lot of times, of course, you know, this is not poetry that is meant for that young adult audience. And so there has to be a kind of bridge, kind of introduction to the adult framework and world of these contemporary poets.
Exactly. I'm just gonna keep scrolling again. If I'm going too fast or if you have any questions, just please slow me down. These are just a few talking points that you'll notice there's only 2 of them. And over the years, when we have our sales meeting 2 times a year, the sales team have kind of let us know that less is more, and that, you know, I used to have a lot of talking points in there and, you know, in a paragraph form, and they prefer that they're in bulleted points and just very short and sweet. And that's why it's called talking points. This is kind of like icebreakers that we use to talk to the sales team for that. The marketing points and strategic plan basically explain what we are committed to do to market each author's book. We have cross promotion through a social media campaign. And sometimes in the past, we've had a publicist who will place reviews in journals. This particular author is going to promote on his Facebook page. We provide electronic review copies available through Edelweiss. And Edelweiss is the website that libraries use to kind of, you know, look for books that they want to have in their libraries. Always nominate the book for as many awards as possible. Target academic departments for classroom adoption using that study guide that we've talked about. And this is just a personalized bullet point for Bruce. He plans on doing a reading at Deep Ellum Books in Dallas, Texas, as he has done in the past, because he already has a connection there. So because Bruce is such a prolific author, like we've talked about, his honors and awards were so vast that I actually had to create a whole separate document for them. Sometimes they're listed here right on the marketing plan, but I had to make a separate document for that. Bruce did not have any travel restrictions. We hardly ever come across that where someone says, you know, I refuse to travel, or I just, you know, I can't, you know, get on a plane for some reason. So that's why that part is blank. An honorarium is, trying to think of how to describe this. If, you know, someone has a speaking engagement somewhere, are they willing to do it for free, or do they expect to have, you know, some kind of, you know, $25 payment or something for doing a reading somewhere? So that's why it says honorarium. And cover art. The cover is actually one of my favorite parts of this job, just kind of getting the cover ideas from the author. Phil and Bill and I, we talk extensively about, what we want for covers, but it's kind of like a team process. It's like the author gives input, we kind of decide what we want to, and we always ask for 3 previous Etruscan covers that resonate with the author. And unfortunately, he did not list any on this one, but further, as I talked to him further, he did give me more information. So I probably just didn't get this in here, but most authors do provide the 3 Etruscan covers that resonate with them. He actually had an idea for his cover of what he wanted, and it's Aaron Wiesenfeld's painting Transmission. And we've worked with Aaron Wiesenfeld before, and Bruce has a personal relationship with him, and he, this was different. He actually came to us and said, this is the image that I would like to use for Scar, and it ended up working for everybody.
And the interesting thing, I agree with you, Pamela. The cover part is the most fun. It gives us a whole new vocabulary to talk about the book, and it's always, there's a kind of triangular relationship. On the one hand, you want to represent the book. On the other hand, we want to represent the press too. I mean, we have a kind of brand, a kind of cover that Etruscan makes, and then also we want to get the author's input, which can be really varied. I mean, Bruce, with Aaron Wiesenfeld, Aaron was the collaborator with Bruce on our book that we did, The Other Sky, which is poems and paintings. So they have a real collegial relationship. And for him, he just came to us and said, here's the cover, or here's the image. And of course, then we take it to a designer, Lisa Reynolds, and they make a beautiful, I think was it Lisa on this one, or?
No, this one is not Lisa.
Okay. But the designer sometimes the designer takes an image that we give, and other times the designer just takes ideas. And sometimes the designer has to come up with many different images and different ideas. And I will be talking to Lisa Reynolds about that process. But for us, the conversations that we have around these covers, I mean, there'll be times when the author really doesn't have any visual experience. They're not well versed in art or in graphic design or in covers, and they don't have an artistic background, and so it's all up to us. I mean, there have been covers which we have kind of talked our way through, and for me, one of the most fun things is talking to us and then talking to a designer and seeing how that verbiage gets made into something visual.
Yes.
Extraordinary process.
It's definitely an extraordinary process, and each book is different. There's no formula that I've ever followed that we've done everything exactly the same way and gotten a cover. There's always, different input. And like you said, it's a delicate balance between, the author's input of what they would like to see on the cover of their book, but yet, the press reserves the right to make the final decision, because we have our own ideas about what we want aesthetically too. So it's, we do have to kind of strike a balance.
Mm-hmm.
So comparable titles for marketing purposes. This is actually way more important than anybody might think, or, that I had definitely never thought of before. This means books that are similar to Scar, books that Bruce thinks are similar to Scar. And the reason that they're so important is because this gets plugged into that metadata on the consortium website that I was mentioning, because consortium wants to see, oh, I know this book post by Wayne Miller. Yeah, it, did so well in whatever way. And now I can understand how, Scar is going to do the same thing that this book did for us. So they are really big on the comparable titles for marketing purposes. And if we don't have titles that they don't think are comparable, or they have ones that they suggest, they will definitely let us know in the sales call. And I've done that before, where they've given us some real valuable feedback, like, hey, did you ever think about this book? I think you should add this to the metadata. So that's a very, very important category for consortium. And here we have the author photo credit. We always have to have that, because that has to go on the back of the book. We have to give the photo credit for whoever took the picture. And then excerpts approved by the author for marketing purposes. These are things that we use on something called a one sheet, which is just basically a piece of paper that has the book cover on it, a photo of the author, a book description, the blurbs that I mentioned, and this goes in the packaging along with the ARC that goes out to reviewers. So we don't just go through the manuscript and pick whatever excerpts we would like to put on there. The author says, Bruce has said, hey, I think you should use an excerpt from The Lost Language. So we always kind of ask the author which sections of their manuscript they think would be best for marketing their book. So that's why I have these here. And that's pretty much it. That's a marketing plan.
Yeah, and as you point out, Pamela, I mean, each one is going to be tailored to the particular author and the particular author's audience, their background, their overall, their overall ability and willingness to interact and to get out there and to be the marketer. One of the things that I think people don't realize, because I think we have a stereotype of the author in their, garret by themselves and not doing anything, when in fact, certainly at the level of the small independent press, the authors are hugely important in terms of generating interest and material for marketing.
Yeah.
They are usually marketable. And the comp titles, there'll be times, and I have this with students and colleagues, when we say, well, okay, you have this book, well, what book is it like? And they'll say, oh, there isn't any book like this. This is unique. I'm like, well, that's not a good thing. To say that first of all, it indicates that you don't really know your neighborhood. You're not aware of who else is doing the same kind of work as you, and that's not good. And secondly, if it truly is unique, there's probably a reason. It's never been done before, because as I can remember one professor writing on a paper of mine, this essay fills a much needed gap. Which at first sounds okay until you start really, wait a minute, we really need that gap. So the comp titles, and interestingly enough too, when we used to come up with comp titles, and we tried to come up with things that we thought were famous and were well known, but one of the things Consortium was telling us, it has to be recent.
Yeah, that's one thing that I've definitely learned through this process too, that at first I would put on the marketing plan, or the author questionnaire, please provide comparable titles. But over time, Consortium was really they changed their actually parameters in the time that I've been here. At first I think it was 5 years, but now it definitely has to be 3 years. No book, it has to be within published
Right.
in the last 3 years.
Right.
It can't be earlier than that, because it's not, and I hate saying this, it's kind of a touchy thing for me to say this, and it's something hard to broach with an author, but I hate to use the word relevant, but that's the word that Consortium's looking for. Look, anything that is earlier than 3 years from right now is not relevant anymore. And isn't that, I don't know, that's something hard to say to a writer or an author, but
Right.
it's, as far as marketing and the market, they really don't want to look at anything 3 years prior from now. So is it sad? Yes, but it's kind of a fact of life.
And it's part of that weird transition from an aesthetic object to a commercial object, because obviously for an author, whether a book came out 3 years ago or 300 years ago, the books can be equally relevant. Dante is relevant to Bruce Bond,
Right.
but the sellers, the booksellers, are out there, going to independent bookstores and libraries and other venues. They are looking at this as something. They want to know what the audience that exists now, the very recent trends of that audience, what are they buying? And when I go into Barnes and Noble, for instance, I get more and more angry because when I look at the poetry section, it has Homer and Dante and Yeats and Whitman and Tennyson. And I'm like, people who like poetry already have these books. I want to see what's come out in the last year or two, and that's not available at Barnes and Noble. That's not what they're selling for. And in fact, then they'll say, well, we don't sell poetry. I say, of course you don't sell poetry, because everybody already has the Tennyson, or everybody has the Milton. You're not going to sell Milton, So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Maybe if bookstores would stock, new titles and promote those new titles in big box bookstores, things might change. But as it is, we have to market, online and through whatever independent bookstores can have a connection to the author. Oftentimes, we might break into a few urban big box bookstores, but the poetry is hard to do with a contemporary audience. And so that's, watching that uh, that breaking of the border between the aesthetic and the commercial object is I think where you feel, and I think the author feels, a little bit of discomfort.
Yes.
Um, but it's also, of course, a real opportunity. Just like seeing the cover helps you see the poem, the book differently. Seeing the book from a potential reader's eye, somebody who we're going to actually try to get it to, helps us feel differently and see, I think, the book. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about the production process is that, I'm there at the beginning and I'm there at the end, and there's an 18 to 24 month uh, transition, between those two times. And I may be involved, from the outside, but you and Bill are taking this day to day to day to day. But for me, I read the book before. Oh, here we have Scar. Lovely.
Now, do you see, I think I finally figured out a way to get the cover up here. Do you see it?
Yes, we do. We do. Yes. Thank you. That's beautiful.
So this is the cover of Scar, and this is actually a painting by Aaron Wiesenfeld. And you'll notice how this particular designer created a wraparound, which means we didn't lose any integrity of the art. It goes from, the billboards here to the girl and, this thing that looks kind of like to me, it reminds me of like a drive-in movie theater screen. And then it wraps all the way around to the back. And these are the blurbs that I were talking about right here. And that's Bruce Bond. So this is this is the finished cover of the book that we'll be publishing on November 10th.
Right. Yes, and it's a beautiful cover. We love Aaron Wiesenfeld. Not only did his cover come up on Bruce's previous book, Choir of the Wells, but also The Other Sky. We used it. And in fact, we've connected Aaron Wiesenfeld with Joe Wood is another person whose cover came to us. If you remember the book You, Y-O-U,
Yes.
that's an Aaron Wiesenfeld cover. And his work is, I think it lends itself so much to book covers. Nin Andrews, who is now one of our authors, her book, The Last Orgasm, is coming out, has just come out.
Yes.
And but her previous book, Why God is a Woman, which is from BOA, another press, has an Aaron Wiesenfeld cover too. So she, there's this. One of the things about small presses is it's not a competitive atmosphere; it's more a collegial atmosphere.
It is, yeah, collaborative.
So I was saying earlier, I see Scar at the beginning of the process, and then I see it now. And during those 18 to 24 months, it's been part of your daily diet. But for me, it's coming to me almost new. Like, I'm a new reader, and of course, when you see it so differently in a codex, in the book itself, as opposed to seeing it in a manuscript or reading it on your Kindle.
Right.
And it's a real pleasure to see. Especially, I'm always amazed at the covers.
Well, one thing that I was also going to say is that, when we get the manuscript, it actually has to go to a copy editor, and then that goes back to the author, and then they decide whether they want to say yes or no to the copy editor's suggestions. And then that manuscript in a Word doc form gets sent to the designer, and then the designer makes something called a first page proof. And I'm here to say that sometimes, we may go to a 5th page proof, or, we'd ideally kind of like to have it go, just through a couple page proofs, but, sometimes it has to be tweaked and the author gives feedback. And then when we finally get to the point where the author says, okay, I'm finished now, this is going to become the galley proof, which is the same thing for the art that I mentioned, the advanced reader copies that go to the reviewer. So then those copies go out probably 6 months from the time that we get the manuscript. and then those ARCs go out to reviewers, and then the author has one more chance to kind of look at the manuscript one more time. It goes back to the copy editor for one final sweep. We take any comments from the copy editor, and then the author has, you know, some final corrections that he or she might make, and then we have the final page proof, which is, you know, what we are about to have with Scar. I mean, we have the final page proof. We just have to, you know, wait for the pub date for those copies to go out.
Right, right, right. Thank you so much, Pamela Turchin.
Oh, it's
It's
my
been a
pleasure.
real pleasure working with you all these years and hearing this process so well elucidated. And you stay safe, and I look forward to a time.
I kind of lost you there on the audio.
Bye, and thank you, Pamela.